In terms of sheer scale of his ambitions and his abilities, I think Null may actually be the most dangerous villain in the Legend of Zelda series so far. Sure, Ganon may want to rule over the world, but that's just baby steps compared to this guy, who wants to destroy the world, to erase all life and all material substance from reality. Null is a devourer of worlds. He is an evil, primordial, eldritch being, born of the void, which has existed since before time itself, before the creation of the world, and he hates it. He despises life. He wants to revert reality back to the way it was in the beginning, formless and empty. He has spent millennia clawing at the threads of the universe, tearing reality apart seam by seam, but never succeeding in his ultimate goal, which is the destruction of everything. Null is mechanically similar in some ways to Calamity Ganon from Breath of the Wild. Back in my video analyzing Calamity Ganon, I talked a lot about how he was a villain, specifically crafted for an open-world Zelda game where you can go anywhere and do anything right from the start. He was a villain who was designed in such a way that it did not matter what order you completed the dungeons. He was not a character, he was more of a physical presence in the world, a force of nature, creating obstacles for the player to overcome, and also spreading a corrupting, corrosive influence that the hero had to purge from the land. Echoes of Wisdom is not quite as open as Breath of the Wild, but Null still functions in a similar way. He's more of a gameplay villain than a narrative villain. Through these rifts, these tears in reality, he creates really interesting gameplay challenges. These still worlds, broken and twisted chunks of Hyrule's landscape suspended in space, are essentially open playgrounds or obstacle courses where the player is encouraged to use the game's new echo mechanic in creative ways. With all that said, I did find Null's story to be surprisingly compelling. He does get a lot of points just for being new. This is the first completely new Zelda villain since the lady in Triforce Heroes all the way back in 2015. We Zelda fans have spent the last decade battling nothing but different forms of Ganondorf. It's a breath of fresh air to finally face someone new. Echoes of Wisdom does do a really good job of tricking players into believing that Ganon is going to be the primary antagonist again. Just look at the cover art. There's Ganon very prominently displayed at the top, and Null is nowhere to be seen. In the very first battle of the game, Ganon has kidnapped Princess Zelda and Link is fighting to save her. We're following all the same old story beats over again. But when Link defeats Ganon this time, something interesting happens. Ganon laughs diabolically while dissolving into a purple haze, and the weapon he drops apparently opens a rift in reality itself. This rift consumes Link and then chases Zelda as if moving with a mind of its own. Players should already begin to suspect that there is something more going on here. Moving forward, we are given some backstory by the King of Hyrule and the Smith Luberry. We are told that in this version of Hyrule, rifts or tears in reality have been appearing for a very, very long time. For as long as anyone can remember, probably for as long as the kingdom has existed, and good luck fitting that into your timeline theories. These rifts always go away eventually, apparently on their own. Sometimes people get caught in the rifts and are never seen again, except for once. One time, not so long ago, a group of children were caught in a rift, but then, to the astonishment of everyone, came back. They were led back to reality by a boy from the rural Suthorn village named Link. All of these children lost their voices, and most of them lost more than that. They lost their passions, their interests, their personalities. You can actually find a couple of these kids in the present, and they are little more than vegetables, lying around doing nothing. They were changed by their time in the rift. All of them except Link. He lost his voice too, but was otherwise unchanged. As the legendary hero, he is resistant to the void's effects, the same as Princess Zelda. Monsters often appear from the rifts as well, and Link and Luberry had begun to suspect that Ganon was the cause of all this, because he was the most powerful monster to ever emerge from a rift. But Link defeated him at the start of the game, and the rifts are still spreading, so no, there must be some other cause. And that is not all the rifts can do. After Zelda returns to the castle, a new rift appears in the throne room, capturing the King of Hyrule and his highest-ranking officials. Then, imposters or echoes of all three of them emerge from the rift and begin giving orders. They have Zelda arrested on false charges and begin planning her execution. These are not the only imposters we encounter during the game. A high-ranking official in the Gerudo court also turns out to be a fake, and then there's Jabu Jabu in the Zora region, and eventually we meet imposter versions of both Link and Zelda too. This mimicry is Null's most insidious ability. He has the power to create a copy of anyone and anything, and more than that, these imposters seem to have some level of intelligence. They can plan and scheme and maybe even speak on their own. I'm still not 100% clear on when these imposters speak, whether that's just Null speaking through them, or if they are actually capable of independent speech. For example, when the Princess Zelda Echo speaks, that definitely seems like it's just Null using her body. But when the King of Hyrule eventually says, "I'm going to use my master's power," that seems like he's referring to Null as his master. So, I don't know, it's inconsistent. But this mimicry also reveals Null's greatest flaw, which is that he does not seem to truly understand human relationships. He is able to use his echoes to sow distrust and chaos among his enemies, preventing them from organizing against him for a while. But again and again, those people end up overcoming his lies, working together, and then easily identifying the fake. It happens in the Gerudo Desert, where when disaster strikes, the Gerudo end up banding together to support each other and rescue a fallen comrade, while the imposter is uselessly languishing in the background, saying, "No, don't go, it's too dangerous, you can't trust her." It happens with the Zora, who again, when disaster strikes, when innocent lives are in danger, are able to set aside their differences and work together, leading to the destruction of the fake Jabu Jabu. And a third time in Castle Town, where Null attempts this 4D level chess move of accusing the real people of being fakes before the real people even have a chance of unmasking the actual imposters. But it falls apart because once again, when disaster strikes, these characters choose to work with each other rather than fight amongst themselves. Ultimately, Null's imposters are very shallow creations, literally skin deep. He's not actually a very good manipulator. I know this is kind of a ridiculous comparison to make because these games are so very different, but compare Null to a villain like Odin in God of War Ragnarok. Odin also has the ability to create imposters, which he uses to sow distrust and division amongst his enemies. But Odin's manipulations are so much more subtle, so much more focused on nipping at the emotional wounds of his targets, without them even realizing he has done it. Odin is able to do that because he has a deep understanding of human emotions and human relationships. Null, despite his very impressive magical abilities, lacks that deeper understanding, which leads to all his schemes quickly falling to pieces as soon as they meet any little bit of friction. I will say, this mimicry ability leads to one of my favorite boss fights in the whole series. Dark Link, or Shadow Link, is a fairly common boss battle in the Legend of Zelda franchise, but in every other game you fight Dark Link as normal Link. It's a test of who has a better command of Link's own abilities. But in Echoes of Wisdom, you face Dark Link as Zelda. These battles become a question of, how do you defeat Link at the height of his abilities without even wielding a sword? Can you overwhelm him with monsters just through sheer numbers? Can you use stealth to sneak up on him? Can you get creative and weird with it? Like, what do you do to defeat the actual hero of the gods? I really liked these fights, but let's move on. Very early on in the game, you meet a magical sprite named Tri, who rescues Zelda from prison. Tri reveals that her and her fellow sprites' purpose is to mend rifts, which they have been quietly doing in the background unnoticed for probably hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of years. Echoes of Wisdom is actually the story of an epic battle over reality, with Null constantly tearing holes in the fabric of space-time and the sprites constantly mending them. In the present, Null has found a way to trap large numbers of sprites using echoes of powerful monsters, allowing him to devour our world unopposed. That is, until Princess Zelda puts a stop to it. The game does not actually reveal Null's presence until around the midway point in the game. Up until then, it still seems like Ganon is the villain, until Zelda herself defeats the big blue pig in battle, and we get this brief glimpse of a horrifying shadowy monster, and the true villain is finally revealed. This version of Ganon was just an echo all along, which is actually kind of fascinating. The way echoes work is that you have to defeat a monster in order to learn how to create a copy of it, after which you can make as many of them as you want. Which means that Null must have encountered Ganon at some point in the past and defeated him in battle, or at least encountered his dead corpse, perhaps after losing to a prior version of Link and Princess Zelda. Null has transformed the big, bad, ultimate evil villain of the entire Legend of Zelda series into nothing more than a slave, a mindless copy, a mere tool to further his own goals. This is what I mean when I say that I think Null may actually be the most powerful villain in the series' history. But even after this initial reveal, the player will still not know anything about his origins or motivations or even his name. To learn all that, we have to complete a couple more dungeons and meet up with the three goddesses, who explain the history of this world and the existential threat it has been facing since the beginning of time. Here is what they say. Before the creation of the skies and the lands, there was a void, a vast nothingness. In the void, some things would begin taking form, only to be devoured by the one who dwelt there. The name of this one is Null. Null desired the world in its entirety and consumed all life indiscriminately. We three goddesses could not abide this and created the skies and the lands to contain Null. All the while, Null continued creating rifts, working ceaselessly to return the world to a void. And so we brought forth the tries to dissipate the rifts, thus keeping the balance. In this exposition, it is revealed that Null is some kind of Lovecraftian nightmare entity who eternally seeks to erase everything, to return the universe to its primordial void state. The purpose of the creation of the world was to contain him. The entire world, all the life that lives here, all the rocks, the plants, the animals, exists only to serve as his prison. It's kind of really crazy. I'm not sure if Nintendo realizes how horrifying of a world they have created here. This is nightmare level stuff. This exposition also reveals Null's primary character trait, which is greed. His sole motivation is that he wants everything. Of course, greed is a defining trait of most villains in the Legend of Zelda series, but Null's is of a slightly different variety. For example, Ganon is definitely greedy too. He wants to control everything, to rule over the world, to possess it. But Null does not really care about ruling over anything. He wants to consume, to devour everything, and I mean everything. He will make the world his by destroying the world. He does not want to allow anything besides himself to exist. If his plans succeed, he will become the universe, because he will be all that's left of the universe. Again, the scale of his ambitions is wild, but let's move on. In the second half of the game, the heroes become convinced that Null is seeking something called the Prime Energy, which eventually turns out to be the Triforce. In order to prevent him from taking control of this Prime Energy, Zelda and Tri travel to 3 sacred locations, and have audience with the 3 goddesses, thereby earning their sanction. With this sanction, Zelda will be allowed to claim the Triforce. However, in a classic Legend of Zelda twist, it turns out that this is what the villain wanted all along. It was all a convoluted and masterful trap. By trying to stop him, we were actually helping him. After she earns the sanction of the goddesses, Null creates an echo of Princess Zelda herself, which he will then use to deceive the Great Deku Tree and gain access to the ancient vault which protects the Prime Energy. This is very similar to the twist in Ocarina of Time, when Ganondorf uses the spiritual stones Link had gathered to gain access to the Sacred Realm. or the twist in Breath of the Wild when Calamity Ganon uses the Divine Beasts, which had been designed to protect Hyrule against the people of Hyrule. As I have discussed in other videos, this kind of twist is meant to make the villains seem more dangerous, more threatening, more intelligent, like they are always 2 steps ahead of the heroes. Anyway, when Null seizes the Triforce, it breaks into 3 parts. This is because, as explained all the way back in Ocarina of Time, when someone with an unbalanced heart touches the Triforce, it always breaks into 3. A Triforce of Power, a Triforce of Wisdom, and a Triforce of Courage. These 3 parts then settle into the hearts of those who best represent those qualities. This time around, it seems that the Triforce of Power went to Null, while the other 2 went to Princess Zelda and Link. Null departs to go kill Link and seize his third of the Triforce, but we chase him down, and in this shot, we finally see Null's true form. His true body is a vast, mountain-sized ball of purple haze and goo that eternally writhes and undulates in the void. Again, this is classic cosmic horror stuff right here. Then there's a pretty cool boss battle against the Princess Zelda Echo to prove who is the better princess at spamming monster copies. And then we save Link and enter Null's body. This environment is really interesting. It is definitely organic. You can see walls and floors made of biological tissue, doors shaped like orifices, and in this final walkway to the core you can see strands of helix spiral DNA. Despite being born of the void, Null is actually a biological organism. He is not a spirit, not a god, just a greedy animal. If you look closely at the walls and floors, you can see these circular dotted patterns. These are the bodies of thousands upon thousands of tri-sprites that he has consumed, which explains why he has the ability to create such powerful echoes. He stole it from his mortal enemies. In this final battle, what we're actually facing is his heart or core, imbued with the energy of the Triforce of Power. It's a pretty cool final battle, with Null using a mixture of dark energy and legions of powerful echoes to try and save himself. But in the end, he is left as nothing more than a torn husk. Empty, broken, and begging for more power. His final words are this impotent demand: "Give it to me." It's one of the more pathetic villain deaths in the Legend of Zelda series. Usually these villains get to say some form of, "I'll be back, I'll get you next time, you just wait and see." But not this time. Null turns out to be a bit of a huge loser at the end. As someone who had gotten really bored with all the different forms of Ganon and Ganondorf we've encountered over the years, I've been wishing for a long time that Nintendo would give us a new villain. And in Echoes of Wisdom, they finally did. While Null does not have as much personality as Zant from Twilight Princess, or Girahim from Skyward Sword, who I consider to be the 2 best villains in the series, and who someday, I will do videos on too. But anyway, the scale of Null's ambitions combined with the Lovecraftian, primordial nightmare elements of his story made for a pretty compelling villain. I went into this game expecting to fight just another version of Ganon, and instead got something a lot weirder instead. I hope this means that Nintendo is willing to experiment with more new villains in the franchise in the future. Zelda stories are at their best when they're doing something new, not just retreading old ground. Maybe the villain in the next big game can be even more bizarre and creative than this one. Or maybe it will just be Ganon again. We only have to wait another 5 years to find out.